And then another thing I do is like, especially when my anxiety rises up in me and I can't, do either of those things to help manage it, is I think through the situation and remind myself, okay, what's the worst possible thing that can happen? And how likely is it that it will happen? Probably not very likely. And so just reminding myself of true things so that I go, okay, I'm calm now, I'm fine now, like it's gonna be okay.
Right there, it would have been a nice time for the drop right here.
We can do this here, watch me rock the flow. Killing it a must, never optional.
Spent guys at the crab table, still ain't signed to a rap label. DVD when I ain't have cable. I got balls, he ain't rap able. A 6D for me is man fatal. Can't see me like a bad angle.
Absolutely, ain't going nowhere. We will be forever, ever and ever.
Peace, beautiful family. This is Dr. Walter Hidalgo, and this is the Know Thyself Show. The Know Thyself podcast utilizes the metaphor of the shelf in order to extrapolate the self. And the way we do that is we invite guests to come in and share something about themselves. And before I introduce my guests, I'm so grateful. Just doing a quick inventory. Check out the website, www.knowthyshelf.tv. In there, you can find all the services and things that we offer, including coaching, workshops. One of the most popular workshops that I give is the Living in the Matrix, the do's and don'ts of social media, because God knows our young people particularly, right, Matt, need this information because this is still uncharted waters, this digital world, if you want to get a copy of my book, because I'm definitely going to chop it up with my guests regarding this topic, Beyond the Four Walls, the Rising Ministry and Spirituality of Hip Hop. That book is the reason I've been able to travel the world, amongst other things, and we're going to talk about that, Matt.
Thanks.
The other thing that we always do is I always like to give a shout out to a group of individuals, and today I want to give a big shout out to all my hip hop scholars. Anybody that's utilizing the culture for pedagogical advancement, creativity, sociological investigation, because we need this. I remember what Dr. Tyson said when we had the first ever hip hop and psychology conference at Fordham University. He said, we got to start documenting this, so please, if you do hip hop, talk to people. Why do you do this? Why do you like this? Where do you get it from? We need this information. So shout out to all my hip hop scholars. Shout out to anybody that has a podcast, anybody's disseminating information in this digital age, because if you're not creating a lane in that space, you will become obsolete. It will become irrelevant. And this is one of the best sort of platforms we got. I want to give a shout out to anyone who has published, written a book, written articles, or shout out to all my authors, because we need this information. It's like Dr. Cone said, you must find your voice. You just got to find your voice, because here's somebody that I respect, that I admire. I found them in the digital world, and I'm just so grateful. My brother from another, Matt, Linder.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on, man.
It is such a blessing. It is an honor. And let me tell you something. I'm right here visiting fam. I'm in Connecticut right now.
Okay. Nice.
And you're in Cali. And it's such a beautiful thing. You know what I mean? And I'll be there in August, like I told you. If you're around, we gotta connect, man.
Yeah.
If you're around.
Definitely.
Let's so so much to talk about. Like when I did my research on you, brother, I was like, oh man, we got work to do. We got work to do. So I want to contextualize things. I always start from the beginning. If we were to step into Bill and Ted's time machine, you ever seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures?
Yeah. Well,
yeah, classic. And I love it because I love history, and they went back in time.
Same. Yeah.
So if we were to step into that machine and you press that button and we went back in time to a younger Matt, what would we see? What would we hear? What would we smell? Because you are originally from
Sacramento.
Cali, stand up, West Coast.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that, man.
Yeah, so I grew up in just outside the city limits of Sacramento, and kind of close to the main mall in Sacramento. But it was a really, really rough neighborhood.
Yes.
Yeah, my dad, he worked for the state of California, but they don't pay much, so we were broke and poor, and so we lived in a really rough place. There was all sorts of crazy wildness that happened on my street. There was so many people setting house on fire. So much, like, you'd hear gunshots all the time, sneakers on the telephone lines, people, like, domestic abuse just like happening right out on front lawn. Just remember my neighbors across the street just pounding on each other, right? Yeah, but that's all the negative. But there's a lot of good too. Like, I got to explore around a lot, and my parents gave me a lot of freedom, and so especially as I got older, and I'd like ride my bike to school and ride with friends around the neighborhood. And there was a park that had a creek nearby, and we just like go play in the creek and catch crawdads, which was awesome and fun. Tried to raise them, but they died after a couple days, so that didn't work out. But yeah, it was just there's a lot of good and a lot of bad. Very, very diverse neighborhood that I grew up in, and I don't know if it's as true anymore, but Sacramento was at one point like one of the most diverse cities in the entire country.
Yes.
So I grew up around all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds. People are Indian, people are
So a lot of Mexicans in Cali.
yes, Mexicans, black people, you can name it all. And then and music was like always such a huge part of my life. My dad always had music on. We listened to like so much hippie music from the 60s, especially the Beatles. A lot of Beatles. Huge fan of the Beatles.
Legends.
Yeah, and so we listened to a lot of folk rock, a ton of it, and that's why I grew up on mostly. But my dad was also like really interested in like what was happening in the 80s and like current music, and so we listened to a lot of new wave bands in the 80s. And my first record when I was a kid that I begged for when I was like 3 years old was Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Classic.
Yeah, so and then we were able to get cable fairly early in the 80s, so we had MTV and stuff, and I watched that like all the time. And we like my dad really got into this show on MTV in the late 80s, early 90s, 120 Minutes, which was all these alternative rock bands, and it was like kind of the beginning of like all that alt rock coming up. And so I was like really immersed in all this alt rock, hippie folk rock music growing up. And then I just had those new wave bands too, and like hip hop was something that was like always around, like growing up in the 80s. It was just everywhere. I just even remember in elementary school, like our teachers like doing a rap song to encourage us at an assembly or something like that,
See, and they were already doing hip-hop pedagogy. We sometimes don't even think how these things were happening in real time.
Right. Yeah. So it was pretty wild. But so like it was everywhere, but like I was kind of like, I don't know, like growing up in the 80s and 90s, like there's just a whole different like attitude about music and culture, and there was like everything was so like segregated and in cliques and everything like that. And it's like, you can't like this kind of music or like that kind of music. And so like when I was in middle school, like it's very like cliquey, like you're a skater or you're a hip hop head or you're into alt rock or you're a goth or a punk or something like that, and like none of them melded or crossed over with each other. And it's like, And then if you liked anything outside of, you know, that identity, you're like a poser and everything. So so I kind of like always like I was discounted like a lot of hip hop for a long time. And even like in my high school years, I was like super into like the local punk and hardcore and metal scene, as well as ska. I was so into ska, like in high school.
Precursor to reggae. Yep.
Yeah. And then my friend and I even formed a ska band because we're in band together, and so like all our friends were in marching band, and so everyone played horns, and like there's this musical style that's popular. It's like, oh cool, we can bring in all our friends that play horns and stuff. So that was pretty fun and dope. And then the thing that really changed for me with how I viewed hip hop was when 2 albums really. It was Lauryn Hill's Miseducation of Lauryn Hill,
classic,
and The Roots' Things Fall Apart.
Oh, another one.
And so I went back and listened to all like the golden era stuff, like the West Coast stuff, and NWA, Ice Cube, all of that. And yeah, I just got familiarized myself with hip hop, and then I was like, oh wow, I really really enjoy this musical style, and I don't know why I discounted it before.
And this is, you know, I'm listening to you, and it's like, it's, well, first of all, I want to say this, and I always, you know, tell people, let me know if I ever go out of bounds with some of the stuff I'm going to say, but you know what's like, me and you are a lot alike in this way. You would never think you came up in the hood, yo. Like, you are super calm. You have this sort of like presence about you, because we're gonna jump into some stuff right now, because, you know, I've been listening to your podcast, but it's like, we really don't talk a lot about some of the things from our upbringing that's like, yo, this really did impact me in some ways. So I know that hip hop has become for us an outlet, a scapegoat, a sort of trying to understand what's happening in life in a creative, sort of therapeutic way. So you made it so easy for me to kind of transition into this question that I have for you, because you wrote a book called Beyond Christian Hip Hop, Move Towards Christians and Hip Hop. And I wrote a book called Beyond the Four Walls, the Rising Ministry and Spirituality of Hip Hop. This beyond, this understanding of beyond, right? And you kind of eased into it, so I'm just gonna jump right into it by asking you this, because a lot of my work overlaps with a lot of the stuff that you've done too, which is why we're gonna continue to build. Because one of the ethnographic questions I asked approximately 25,000 people from all over the world is hip hop spiritual, Matt?
Yeah, it is.
Talk to us about that, please. Can you extrapolate?
Yeah. So to clarify, I just contribute. That book is a collection of essays, and I contribute an essay to that book, and there's other writers in there too. So and that collection was put together by 2 hip hop scholars. It's everywhere in hip hop, even from its beginnings. Spirituality has been part of hip hop. If you're just, if you look specifically at Christian hip hop, you really have like the first artist in 1985. I think that's when Bible Break came out. But there's always been spiritual elements. I mean, even if it's like not like, oh, I am writing this as a religious piece of music or as some sort of way to connect with the spiritual or get people to connect with the spiritual, there are just elements of spirituality that show up in hip-hop music because it comes out of these rappers' identities and their histories of their past, whether they, grew up in a church or a mosque or whatever. Artists that are like very intentional, like a lot of the Christian hip hop scene, like they're very intentional about like, we are doing this to talk about our Christian spirituality. But then you have other artists that are in the mainstream, someone like a Kendrick Lamar or Lauryn Hill, who are very explicit about their faith in their music and how it interacts in their life, in their community, and in the broader world. But they don't, label themselves explicitly as part of that Christian hip hop, movement. And I mean, there's just like, we always, like, all of us have like seek out, something else, God, or whether it's just like holding on to a hope of something that things will be different, and like hip hop is such a great medium for that, because there's so many words that can be vocalized in a song, that it can go through all these like complex, spiritual feelings and thoughts in a way that their music, like, at least lyrically, can't get on to the same level. They might, emotionally be able to move spiritually in this similar ways, but lyrically not the same level.
Yeah, and Matt, I want to ask you, because as we all know, like, hip hop is now, I say unofficially, but it's 50, right? It's 50 years old. Wow. And I feel like I grew up with it. I turned 42 a couple of weeks ago, and it's like I feel like it's just was part of my being. And you too. You celebrated, right? If I'm not mistaken. You're Aries.
Yeah, I turned. Yep. I turned 44.
Wow, look at that. We're Aries men right here. Shout out to my Aries in the building. We're very, we special, yo. How do you see the culture now? I mean, it's 50, right? Like we have 50-year-old friends, uncles at one point. Like, how do you see hip hop now? Like,
I mean, it's definitely, I think there's multiple things going on, right? So I think the stuff in the mainstream, like, I think all the movement, all the creative movements have always been in the underground. And the mainstream sometimes pushes the culture forward, but often not as much as the underground. The underground is where I see a lot of the movement. Because the stuff on the top is, you like your Kendricks, who is amazing. I love Kendrick so much. Sure, yeah. But you have like lots of others that are like, I mean, there's lots of hip hop that's just like fun party music, and that's fine and good and all. Sometimes you just want to dance and have fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, like, I like the deeper stuff. Like, I like to get into it, and I think the mainstream is not always pushing the envelope of things. And I think there are like a number of artists like in the underground that are like not quite mainstream, that are pushing things in interesting ways. And I feel like hip hop is really right now in the underground is like in a punk moment where it's like DIY. It's like, let's do brash, abrasive things, in your face things. And I think that kind of started with like all the SoundCloud rappers and stuff, and doing like the emo rap. But now you got artists like Rico Nasty, that just has like a very like aggressive delivery, and the music is like super chaotic. And stuff like that that's more experimental like that is super interesting, and I think like pushes things forward. But I also think it's interesting that you have all the Griselda Records folks.
Oof, God, I love Griselda, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I like that stuff because it like reminds me of like hip hop that like I grew up with, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's nostalgic, but at the same time, I'm like, well, are they just like going on the nostalgic train, or are they actually like moving forward?
Right.
And thing. Yeah. So I mean, I enjoy it. Like I'll listen to all of them and everything. So yeah, you got an interesting mix of like going back to like the 90s hip hop. You got like the mainstream artists that are like more the pop rap, and then you got this underground that I feel like has like more of like a punk DIY vibe to them. Well, I think it's super interesting too, like even with in the mainstream, I think that the greatest thing with the mainstream right now is all the women rappers.
Right. Yeah.
Right now.
There is like a surge, like a rise of femininity in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing because like there was not many in the 80s and the 90s. You had like Queen Latifah as the biggest one, you know. But yeah, a lot of their sounds is really interesting because a lot of them, their sounds like go back to like 80s
Yeah.
type hip hop beats. Some of them have that like Miami bass sound,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah.
And it's just like wild to me hearing that stuff. So
Yeah.
I think it's hip hop is just like all over the place right now.
But you
And
know,
I think there's good and there's
Yeah.
some that's okay, you know.
It was interesting that you brought up with the rise of women in the culture, and I'm wondering if a lot of that has to do too because we're living in a very everything's about optics, and social media, and women by far are beautiful and they can doll up, so they have the more ability to catch your attention on a beauty scale because then they just become these walking billboards through makeup agencies, clothing lines, and etc. So not only do you have like the music and the aesthetics but it really has opened this sort of like tentacles of business ventures because of the optics of social media that they can kind of capitalize and leverage at the same time. Versus a guy who, we get bravacious and it's anger and it's cool, but it's like to see a woman spit them bars and still be lady like and just have her swag is dope. But it's interesting that you made me think about that too, man.
Yeah, I came across a video on TikTok of these two women in Brazil, and they're doing battle rap with each other, and they were they were so good.
Yeah.
Like,
and hip hop in Brazil, it's huge.
Yeah. They were just like so hard hitting and just so much rage, and it was so awesome.
Yeah. And I kind of want to switch gears a little bit with this, Matt, because you write within, at least what I'm seeing and with all the other work that you're doing, you mentioned Christianity, you mentioned the church, spirituality, all this stuff, right? So I wanted to ask, did you grow up at a particular religion, or was that in the household?
Yeah, I grew up in Christianity.
Yeah.
And I was at a Lutheran church.
Oh, okay. Lutheran. Yep.
Yeah, when I was a kid. And then in my early 20s, I joined a non-denominational Pentecostal church. And was there for a few years. And then went to a Presbyterian church. So like exact.
Yes.
But yeah, spirituality has been always like so important part of my life. But I would say, and being in the church, but it wasn't something I really took seriously in my 20s, and really started to seek out God and more spiritual things in my life, and really to incorporate those ways into how I do things. And
Yeah, and I'm asking because again, I see a lot of you in me too. I grew up Catholic,
Okay.
but I call myself, and this probably might be the name of my book, Guerrilla Catholic, because I critique everything and everyone, including myself. But I'm open. I guess I would tell people I'm more spiritual, and for me, I just believe the Lord manifested him, her, itself in different ways to different people all throughout history. And for me to confine God into one space and time is extremely arrogant of me. That's the way I view things. But the reason I asked this question is because I think it's a great follow-up to this question, which is how much does your faith sort of impact the work that you do? I think that's an easy layup. Or inform the work that you do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It greatly impacts the work that I do. Because of all that knowledge and because all that personal experience with Christianity, those things are those connections to God, to Christian faith, are easy for me to identify when I listen to hip hop songs. And I'd also written a paper on Kendrick Lamar and all the Christian themes in his music, in everything from Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City, and To Pimp a Butterfly.
Yes, great album.
And having that, but also I grew up in very white denominations, so I had to study and expand my knowledge beyond those theological limitations into more diverse authors, and I'd read James Cone.
Dr. Cone lived right above me when I went to Union Theological Seminary, man. Yo, monster. Rest in peace, Dr. Cone.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's my brother. Yes.
So yeah.
And I think, and it's so beautiful because I see, so, my background, I went to Union Theological, I studied church history and sociology, and then I pursued my doctorate in kind of the same field as a socio-theologian. So when I was reading and looking at your work, I'm like, oh my God, there's so much cross-pollination in our work and research. And, I remember at the time when
absolutely.
I was getting my doctorate, I graduated in 2014, I was only seeing one other person who I got to meet at Fordham. Her name is Dr. Alexis Manstrong. She did her doctoral work on, I think, the Afro spirituals and hip hop or something like that. I don't remember, at a Texas State University. But then I'll never forget when my advisor said that there's going to be, he told me, Tingnet Alatunji, who's the son of Babatunde Alatunji, who's a legend percussionist who brought the Western African percussionist sound to the United States. He said, we're living in a hip hop renaissance. And I'm seeing all the work and research that people are doing from different fields. And I'm seeing more of it from the theological spiritual realm. So when I see the work that you're doing, and even the podcast that you have, I really want to switch it up with this one real quick, because we can go so deep. And notice how I go all over, because we're just having fun.
It's all right.
Talking,
it's
and it's
cool. It's good
because you have this. You have Jesus is a punk rocker podcast.
Yeah.
I freaking love that, right? Because for me, Jesus is so many things. For me personally, Jesus was a ninja. And I can go. I really believe he was a ninja in so many different ways, and we can go into that. But kind of moving a little bit of semi.
I mean, there was that one time where the people tried to push him off the cliff and he slipped through the crowd.
Oh my God, that's the
very
reason I said.
ninja-like.
Oh my God, that's exactly the theme I'm coming. You know, I think I might write a book just on that, dude. I've been on my writing a book thing lately. That's
Do
why.
it, do it.
Because that's exactly that. Yeah, he was a ninja, man. He was awesome. Now you see me, now you don't. Like Ghostface, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think one thing that I appreciate, I think especially where you and I are in our lives, age wise, men of faith, hip hop. Are you a parent, Matt? Do you have any kids?
Yeah, I have. Yep, I have 3 kids. I have a 14-year-old and 6-year-old twins.
Beautiful. Oh my God. So
Yeah.
we're hip hop dads because
Yeah.
I have a 10-year-old daughter. So we have
Yep.
like all these things. So, but one thing and we're circling back, that I just want to hear from you because, you know, there's been a lot of conversations around healing. You know, I think COVID re-traumatized a lot of people, even opened up or reopened some wounds. You mentioned a lot of stuff growing up where you grew up. I grew up in the south side of Providence, Rhode Island, and then New York. You know, like I got stories. I grew up in the gang era. I've seen a lot of not so great things, right?
Yeah.
But you've been very vulnerable on this podcast because I told you I was listening to you, and I got teared because I don't think as men we talk enough. And I was having the best conversation with my cousin here, my cousin's husband, but he's one of my best. He turned 40. He's April 7th, so he's an Aries too, right? And we were just talking as men.
Oh wow, nice.
You know, yeah, this is Aries Nation, right? And we were talking a lot about how we don't really do a self-assessment. I think it's so important, and being a little bit vulnerable. That, you know, I know I can't say just Aries. It's just me. Like I can be very stubborn. I hold things in. Eventually, I crash and let it out in not so great ways, especially if you got alcohol or drugs involved, like real spill stuff, right? But there's things in our lives that have traumatized us and we have never really fully recovered it. And I think one of the best ways to start is just by having a safe space to talk about it, right? But
Absolutely.
I want to just not getting deep into any of your trauma, but I just want to know from you, how does one heal thyself? What is something that has helped you in your journey of healing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my trauma gave me anxiety.
Oh man.
Yeah. And it was something that I didn't really deal with until 2020. So when I was 40. Yeah. And it was something that I'd always struggled with, my anxiety. And so I went to therapy for a year and a half to work through that and give.
I'm in therapy now, Matt, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is great. Thank God.
It was really helpful. Yeah. Praise God for that. Yeah. It gave me a lot of tools to help manage my anxiety. And the biggest ones are moving my body, like running.
I love running, Matt.
Yeah,
It's so
it
therapy.
it releases so much of my anxiety, the physical exhaustion of it. But then also I'm listening to music or podcasts while I'm doing it, and I'm thinking a lot at the same time that my body is releasing all the anxiety.
Yes,
So that's huge for me. And the other thing is like the exact opposite, doing mindfulness and just taking time to breathe deeply,
Speak on it.
to pray,
Yes.
and just be in my body in the moment, not think about anything else, because my brain is always going into
Oh, me too.
worst case scenarios, all
Yeah.
directions all the
Yes.
time.
Yes,
You know?
yes.
And then another thing I do is, like, especially when my anxiety rises up in me and I can't, do either of those things to help manage it, is I think through the situation and remind myself, okay, what's the worst possible thing that can happen? And
Yeah.
how likely is it that it will happen? Probably not very likely. And so just reminding myself of true things so that I go, okay, I'm calm now, I'm fine now, like it's gonna be okay.
I, yo, I'm loving what you're saying right now, yo, because
Yeah.
I think of two things. I always tell people I love what my brother Common says in that song "Hungry." He goes, "We got to do more deleting and less saving, yo." Because we are
Yeah.
computers, and you already know when you got a lot of things in that computer, it'll eventually do what it was doing earlier to me, right?
Yeah.
What you got for us?
Okay. So I got two things. So first is the movie Her, starring Joaquin Phoenix. And I saw both these things are related to 2013, 2014 in my life. So I saw this in 2013. I was at home with the flu, and I was dog sick for a week. And this is this was the first time in my life I had been alone and bad. Because in 2013, earlier in that year, my first marriage ended, and yeah, and so did like all my friendships that I had at the time. They all went away too, and I didn't really have anyone that stuck by me. And so I watched this film in that state where I was like deadly sick, and just gone through a bad divorce and felt so alone and lonely. And this film just like I was sobbing by the end of it because there's so much of myself at that time that I identified with, where he was just feeling so alone and wanting human connection. And so he buys this AI basically and is getting connection through that way, and trying to seek out that connection through technology. And at the time I had joined a Facebook group for writers, and I was like, a lot of the connection I had was like human connection was through that Facebook group, and there were people that were all across the country, and none were local to me in Sacramento. So a lot of my human interaction was through social media, and so I related to it in that way. And then his ex-wife in the film is the same name of my ex-wife.
Interesting.
And then I also had started dating someone, like he was dating this AI, and it was I put too much into that relationship in very unhealthy ways, and just like he was doing, because he was like grasping on to have someone to have that real human connection with. And so I related to that. And then at the end where he ends up with his this friend who's played by Amy Adams, and basically it's heavily implied at the end that they're like a couple now. So yeah, so in the end he ends up with a hot redhead, and like in 2015 like
with a hot redhead,
my wife. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's funny. Yeah, how it paralleled so many things in my own life at the time. So yeah, so like yeah, that's kind of was like my past and the present, and then like what happened in the future in my life at that point.
Matt. I just, like I always do with other people, I gotta say to you, because I think it's so important. I'm very proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
Extremely grateful and honored. We're going to maintain in contact with each other because
Yes,
there's a lot of
definitely.
work to do.
Yes.
If people want to reach out to you, how do they connect with you? Give us your information.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Threads as Destroyer of Butterflies.
Oh, sounds good.
That's my username. They can follow me there.
It's beautiful. And, as we always do in the Know That Show, we end with a quote.
Yeah.
So this comes to us
When
from
do I have to explain that username?
Yeah. So we end with this quote, and this one comes to us, man, from an anonymous person, and it reads as such. If you continue to carry bricks from your past, you will end up building the same house. Wow. Yeah.
Yep.
Peace, family.
I can't teach you how to rap like me. I can't teach you how to trap like me.
What's really good? It's your girl, Mala Reigns, BX's own bad girl. And I'm chilling with the homie, Walter. I Know That Shelf. You heard?